so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about your story and share a little bit about your journey of recovery and having a life worth living. And hopefully, the people that are hearing, whether it's parents or, youth or anything in between, find something within your story to hold on to and, figure out a way for them to have a life worth living as well. So please, take it away, share your story, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good. So I'm going to try to do my best to summarize the key points of my journey, because it is quite a long story. So it all sort of started for me in terms of my relationship with substances. I actually at one point was straight edge, and for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it was like a particular subgroup of people who do not drink, they don't do drugs, and even sometimes go as far as not having caffeine or sugar in their diet because they like to be as clean as possible. It was very much associated with like the punk scene. And so for like a short while there, for 2 years, I was like, no drugs, no nothing, no drinking. And even though I was about 15 to 17 during that time, people were drinking around me. So even though I wasn't 19 yet, there was still a choice to be made. And for a long period of time, I decided that's not something that I want to do. I'm not interested in it whatsoever. And so even all the way up to my prom, everybody else was drinking in the after party, and I was just a sober person. I was perfectly happy to be that person. And then I went off to university, and obviously being around more people, drinking a lot more, partying a lot more, I was just surrounded by different substances, mostly just marijuana at that time. And that's just what was more available. I wouldn't necessarily say that that was the gateway for me, but it's more ubiquitous than other drugs, obviously. So that was the first thing that I had tried. And then my relationship, I think, with addiction in general is complicated by the fact that I also have bipolar disorder. So I tend to be very impulsive. And so when I am in a state of mania, I want to be reckless. I want to go out party and get drunk, and I want to lean into these slightly more dangerous behaviors. And so it's sort of just found itself in using substances. Whereas when I was younger, I used to, fill my time in loneliness and those like anxious feelings with spending time with friends, like obsessively seeing them every single day, and just never really having enough time for myself to be quiet. So I was always filling it with something. It just happened to turn into substances kind of later in my life. And then I started getting into harder drugs. I started doing party drugs. I started going out a lot. And I don't think it necessarily impacted my life at that time, because nothing I was doing was very serious. I was sort of just like working a part-time job at the AGO. I was, not in school. And so I had a lot of like free time before I started my career. And so it felt sort of carefree in some sense. I also like dabbled in psychedelics. And so I guess I didn't also realize at that time, because I was young and I was my formative years around my early 20s, that it was impacting me in such a big way. And I think that tends to be a lot of people's stories, that if you do something consistently all the time and it's habitual, you don't realize what impact it's having on you because you haven't done it in so long. So you don't really see the contrast. And so I unfortunately continued my drug use and everything all the way up until, I don't know, when I was 25 or so. And when I was 25, my brother, who also struggled with substance use much more intensely than I had, he passed away in May of 2016 from an overdose. And after that happening, I had really no idea about harm reduction. I had no idea about the overdose crisis. I had no idea about any of that stuff until it happened in my own family. And so that event happening really changed my perspective of going out and doing party drugs, because I realized it wasn't worth my life. And that the more that I learned, and I also didn't want to leave my parents with just no children, because, I had gone down that same path. And so it felt like a different kind of responsibility to me. And so my relationship with substances changed a lot at that time because when you lose somebody that you love in your immediate family specifically, it completely changes your life. And it started this like entire new journey for me, which I'm very grateful to have been on, even though it started in kind of such a terrible way, because I found a greater sense of self-worth. I stopped needing the validation of other people, and I stopped filling my empty holes with all of these different things. And I started trying to fill them up myself and getting to know myself. And I went on this whole journey towards that. And now where I am, I do still drink socially. It's not really a problem for me in any real sense. It doesn't impact my livelihood, my relationships. I haven't drank so much so that it's ruined me the next day for quite a long time, which I'm very proud of because I used to do that a lot. And at this point as well, I feel like I want to say I have a healthy relationship with smoking marijuana. But I think that as somebody who struggles with addiction, that line of I use this and it helps me, and maybe I use this too much, it's becoming detrimental to me, is very blurry. And it's something that I think has to be constantly reassessed, especially if you have pushed it too far in the past. And so I think through learning everything that I have, through my brother's passing, through working with organizations who speak about harm reduction and educate on addiction, substance use, substance abuse, I've found that there is a happy medium that can happen, that it doesn't have to be, I have struggled with substances, I need to be fully sober and commit to that. Because for me personally, I am bipolar, but I don't use medication. And I find that when I feel very, very depressed, smoking a little bit of weed helps, and it makes me feel a little bit less heavy, a little bit less overwhelmed. I still experience it, but I think I have a healthier relationship with substances now. And that's taken 10 to 12 years for me to get to that place. And so it is a really difficult journey to go through. And I realized as well, some of the substances that I was using when I was 25 and under were making my bipolar disorder so much worse. I had, now looking back, I realized that there were moments where I was not connected to reality. But in the moment, it felt like I was. And some of the things I used to think and say and do, I look back and I just like cringe at my former self. I don't blame her because she didn't know better, but it's made me realize that like it really messed with my mood disorder. And I had no idea at the time. It felt like it was making me feel better at the time, but I was doing some long-term damage. And so, yeah, I think it's been a very difficult road to get to where I am today, but I wouldn't change it. And I think that it's made me a stronger person. It's made me somebody who is much more intuitive. And so I listen to my body. If I have 2 drinks in a night and I feel really sad the next day, which I've started to notice, then I can become intuitive and go, that's the thing that's changed in my diet. I need to listen to my body and maybe ease off. Now is not a good time to drink. And just listening to this instead of listening to everybody out here and trying to find fulfillment in anything outside of myself, and just trying to turn inwards and constantly reevaluate. I feel like you're never fully there. You're never fully at a place where you're not going to struggle with mental health. You're not going to struggle with your substance use. You're not going to struggle. You're always going to struggle at different degrees depending on what's happening in your life, especially if you're going through something stressful. But just to always know that you can always turn inwards. You can always check in with yourself, and that the work that you do through like meditation or like healthy eating or exercising or any of those other positive lifestyle things are always there for you, no matter what you go through in life. And just know that no matter what you go through, that you'll be okay. Everything that I've been through, I would have never imagined I would have made it through, and somehow I did. And so I think a lot of the times we're stronger than we realize, and that just realizing that it's a journey. And that no matter where you are, doesn't mean that you can't recover or you can't embark on a recovery journey. Even if you've fallen off the wagon like more than 10 times, it's still possible for you.
Yeah. Megan, thank you so much for for being so open and vulnerable and sharing your story. There's a lot in your story that I can absolutely relate. And you mentioned the bipolar piece, right? So I also struggle with bipolar. So I do understand the correlation, right, between mental health and an addiction, and especially bipolar, because there is that impulsive side, and there is that I would call like a self-destruct when
Definitely.
I'm feeling that. And a lot of people, because you mentioned about, filling those holes within yourself, and we do that, with food, or we do that with sex, or we do that with shopping. But for us, we did that with drugs. And at the end of the day, that was never the solution, right? It was a band-aid fix. It was something that in that moment you're like, I'm okay, but then it was always going to come back eventually.
Yeah.
And the thing that really amazes me is the fact that you changed your relationship with substances and use that harm reduction model. Because when people think about like recovery, there's always this sense of like you have to be clean and sober. Or there isn't, you're either clean and sober or you're using. And for myself, I the best thing that worked for me was to be clean and sober. There was never a healthy relationship with drugs or alcohol. Like that was just, I always, one is too many and a thousand's never enough.
Yeah.
So I had to go to that side. But it's really fascinating that you were able to change your relationship with that, and that is actually an option, and people don't think that that's an option for them. So how did you manage to find within yourself that, yes, it's scary to go down the path of substance misuse or addiction, given the fact that you do have a history with losing your brother due to an overdose, and finding that, yes, I can still, drink or do whatever in a moderation.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the level of risk that I was willing to take. So the level of risk that I was willing to take, I mean, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's essentially like every single drug falls along a spectrum. And the most dangerous ones are the ones whose efficient dose is very close to the lethal dose. And so the closer they are together, if it's like 1, for example, as a ratio to 10 times is the lethal dose, that's a very risky substance to take. Whereas, I mean, marijuana, for example, I mean, there is definitely a degree to which that can ruin your life, or at least impede your ability to live a fulfilled life. But it's a lot less risky. It still poses a risk to like my health and my lungs and all these kinds of things, but I also use like a vape, and I try to not smoke like joints, because that's a better health benefit. So it's all sort of just about like risk management for me. And now that like I run a business, I run a nonprofit, I also have to be really thoughtful about like I can't spend an entire day be hungover, and not be able to show up. Like there's this thing that also fulfills me, that relies on me in almost every way, that if I don't show up, it doesn't happen. And I would rather in my life focus on doing this to the best of my ability, than to, have like nights out partying and doing that kind of thing. So but to your point earlier as well about people becoming addicted to things like food or sex or TV, or like the worst one is like your phone. I mean, I think it's like an addiction that's completely taken not just our generation, but older generations as well. And I think being able to look at something like your social media use and be able to say, okay, a little bit of this is good because I connect with my peers. I follow things that are inspirational and it gives me something. Too much of that is obviously not going to be good for you. And so I think we all need to think about like our digital health and how we engage with digital things. And I think it applies to just everything. It's like food as well. I mean, yeah, maybe I'm going to eat a box of 6 donuts one day, but I'm not going to do it every day. And so it's just about figuring out what that balance is. And I mean, if the pandemic has showed me anything, it's that that balance constantly changes. When the pandemic first hit, I gave myself all allowances to just eat whatever I wanted. I didn't need to exercise. I was very stressed out, very anxious. And so I gave myself space to just go a little bit further into that than I could. But I think it's also about knowing yourself. Like, I know that I will eventually get back to eating healthy again, that I will eventually exercise again. I know that because I think partly because I am bipolar, like it's cyclical. So when I have more energy, I'm more motivated to do those things. Um, so yeah, I think it's just being able to look at your relationship with those things. And I think it really depends too on what it is, especially if it's a substance like opioids, where there's a physical dependency and it rewires your brain. It's very different. And I think that's why I find it so frustrating that people attach such a stigma to drug use, because anybody who is willing to pass a judgment about somebody using drugs, I promise you, they are addicted to something in their life. It might be coffee, it might be sugar. I mean, nobody lives a perfect life. Like, we all get addicted to things, and we like to find comfort in things that are easy and pleasurable. It's just that that line can be a little bit blurry. And when we look at drugs, there's this entire history of drugs are bad, people who use drugs are bad, they have poor impulse control, and there's this whole narrative that goes along with it. And it makes it really difficult for people to seek help, because you don't want to tell somebody if you're struggling with, oh, a cocaine addiction. That's an embarrassing thing to tell somebody. And if you don't know what they're going to say or if they're going to be supportive, you're probably less likely to seek help. Whereas if I went to my friends, I said, I think I'm addicted to my phone, I think there would probably be a little bit less judgment and a little bit more support. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I know it's I think what recovery has taught me the most, and I feel like you may resonate with this, but it was about having a healthy relationship with myself first before realizing all of my other kind of issues, right? Um, I know that I can't drink, for example, right? I know that, and it's not in a way that I'm mad at myself or I'm like, oh, like, boo-hoo, Maria can't do this. Um, it's about, like, be gentle with yourself. Like, I never had a good relationship with alcohol. That wasn't a thing for me. And to honor myself, because I built self-respect and self-worth going through my recovery, I know that doing this to myself is not going to be beneficial. And it doesn't matter how impulsive I may be, or how shitty my day is going, or week or month or whatever it is. I make the choice every single day to decide whether I use or I stay clean, right? Every single day I wake up, can't think about tomorrow, but today I'm clean. And to me, that's enough. And through your story, it's finding a really good relationship with yourself, and listening to your body, and knowing what you need, and being intuitive, like you described it. And I find that so fascinating, but in a very beautiful way, and the way you describe it, because that's the last thing people may think about doing.
Yeah, I feel like it relates to me in my mind to the work of Gabor Mate. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he wrote an entire he used to work in the downtown east side in Vancouver, where addiction is obviously rampant. And so he talks about a vast majority of people who struggle with addiction have some form of trauma. Obviously, that's not always the case. It's not a blanket statement, but there's something internally that they are running away from, haven't dealt with, haven't processed with the help of a professional. And so I think it all comes back to the self and the individual and your relationship with yourself. I mean, I think when you devalue yourself and you think that you are not worthy, you're willing to put up with almost any treatment from anybody else. You're willing to put yourself through any sort of treatment, even if it's not benefiting you. And so having a relationship where you go, oh, yeah, I'm worth this, and I'm valuable, and I'm important, and having, like you say, like a relationship with yourself. If you were to describe your perfect friendship, what is that like? You are supportive, they listen, you both listen to one another. When you have little wins, you celebrate those wins, but we don't often do that with ourselves. You know, we go, oh, you messed that thing up again. You would never speak to somebody else that way, but for some reason, because it happens in here and there's nobody else going, oh my gosh, like you should really stop talking to yourself that way. It just continues on until you become conscious of it. I think that's a part of, and I actually don't know this very well. You might be able to speak to this, but I know that AA and Alcoholics Anonymous, a lot of it is just asking people to have a degree of like self-awareness of like what's going on in their head. What is that process? Are there any triggers in my environment that lead me to want to use? And just like turning into yourself and just becoming your own sort of best friend, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about having a relationship with yourself, and it's about stop escaping or finding, a fix to your problems or a band-aid, to everything, and just admitting that, or at least for myself, it was admitting that drugs had taken a hold of me, and it was about being able to break free of that. And to me, that's the most powerful thing that I've ever done. I think recovery is one of the hardest things I've personally done, and it takes a lot of courage and strength and vulnerability, and it's something that is not a pretty journey. I don't think any journey is pretty, but at the end of the day, it becomes beautiful, right? And you look back, and I can't recognize myself when I look back. I'm like, who is she? Because that's not me, right?
I think that's always a good sign. If you ever look back and you're like, oh, I'm the exact same person that I used to be, that's probably a bigger red flag.
I was gonna say, I'm like, red flag there. So what is something that you want people to know, or you feel like they may need to hear, whether again it's a parent, caregiver, a youth that is struggling with substance misuse, addiction, or any type of issue like that? What is something that you would like to share?
This is sort of like a difficult question for me in that I've sort of been in that space, loving somebody who struggles so deeply with addiction, and having to go through that for about 10 years. And when I look back on that, near the beginning after he passed, I felt like guilty, like, oh, I could have done more and all this kind of stuff. But looking back, I think the only thing that I wish I had done different and that I would encourage other people to do is to have open conversations about substance use. And even if they're unwilling to let you know that they are using, let them know that if they are, they can tell you about it, they can be honest about it, and that you're not going to judge them in any way, that you're there to support them. And just because we're in an overdose crisis at the moment, if they are going to use, let them know that they can count on you being there, and that if you are going to use, just don't use alone. I would like to be around, or give me a call before you're going to use, and then I'm going to call you. And if you don't pick up, I'm going to call the police. Just make sure that people are safe. I think that's the whole harm reduction model, is not to teach people don't do drugs, don't do this, and place judgment on them, but really try to be compassionate so that when they do possibly one day decide that they want to take a recovery journey or they want to be sober, that they know exactly who to come to, because you're going to be supportive, you're going to be understanding, and you're not going to meet them with judgment. You're not going to say, I told you so. That's just what people really want, is to be reassured and comforted and to know that they're safe being honest. And at the end of the day, if somebody wants to use substances, you have to take a certain degree of you have to take a step back and recognize that that's not about you, and that the only thing you can do is be compassionate and loving. And that's the only thing you're going to regret not doing, is just letting them know, I'm here for you no matter what, at any time. If you ever want to talk about this, I'm here. And to offer safe space for them if you can, if that's something that you can offer them. Um, and yeah, and just teaching about harm reduction among anything, even if like harm reduction is in drinking alcohol. So if you drink a beer, for example, versus taking a shot of a hard liquor, that's not great harm reduction. You want to go slow. That's always the harm reduction tip, go very slow. And it's the same thing with hard drugs.
Mhm.
If you're going to use a hard drug that you just got, use a little bit and then continue to dose accordingly after that, as opposed to like, it's like ripping a bong, for example, would be bad harm reduction if you don't smoke weed, for example, because it's going too far into the deep end. You don't want to do that. Go very slow. And if you are going to use, just use smart. There's so many amazing resources out there. And don't be afraid to reach out for help as well. If you are supporting somebody, there are a lot of support groups for loved ones supporting loved ones. Because you're not always going to know the right things to do, the right things to say. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just educate yourself on their addiction, their substance use, or the mental health disorder they're struggling with. That's how you can empower them as well.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you, Megan, for sharing your story. It's been an honor um, hearing your story and having you open up about some of the topics that are very difficult to talk about. And hopefully, whoever is listening or watching uh, gets something out of it, and I'm sure they will. I've gotten a lot out of it from just listening to you. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's just have a safe space to talk to somebody about the hard things. And that's all you can do. So I appreciate you being here and sharing. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a really difficult topic to talk about, and the more that we talk about it and open, honest conversations, the more people feel like they're not alone when they are struggling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan.